Welcome to the Poverty Point World Heritage Site. We are going to go on a journey that has amazed people with these prehistoric earthworks, considered by many to be the New York City of its day. Many countries have archaeological sites that provide a tantalizing glimpse into the human past. These include the Lascaux Caves in France, Stonehenge in England, and the Pyramids of Giza in Egypt. Here in Louisiana, the Poverty Point World Heritage Site also offers a unique view into human prehistory. Around 1650 BC, American Indians began to build the massive earthwork complex of mounds and ridges that today make up the Poverty Point World Heritage Site. These people had no wheelbarrows, wagons, or even animals to move the dirt. They only had baskets, simple tools, and their own hand labor. The level of organization needed to build the earthworks in this environment was exceptional for a group that didn't even practice agriculture. They were hunters and gatherers. Because there are no naturally occurring stone here, the Poverty Point inhabitants got these materials through local sources that were at least 18 to 25 miles away, and through trade or travel to the Appalachian Mountains, the Midwest, and beyond. Without horses or cars, they likely traveled by water, using dugout canoes to haul tons of stone here to make into tools and ornaments. We don't know what the American Indians who built these earthworks called themselves or this place. Poverty Point was the name of the historic plantation established at this location around the year 1850. We will now go on a journey to take a look at Poverty Point. Before going on a tour of Poverty Point, let's talk a little bit about what's inside the museum, starting with the Poverty Point people themselves. The people of the Poverty Point culture who constructed the earthworks were hunter-fisher-gatherers rather than farmers, what we typically look at as farmers. They are an example of a complex hunter-gatherer society that constructed large-scale monuments. The vast majority of other prehistoric monuments, ranging from Stonehenge in England to the Great Pyramids in Egypt, were constructed by agricultural societies in which crop surpluses allowed greater density of population and stratification of society. The people who lived at Poverty Point were Native Americans, descendants of the immigrants who came to North America using the Bering Strait land bridge approximately 20,000 to 23,000 years ago. The people identified with the Poverty Point culture developed a distinct set of cultural traits different from other contemporary inhabitants in the lower Mississippi Valley. Time, cultural change, and the lack of written records prevent researchers from identifying the people of Poverty Point as ancestors to any specific historic or modern tribe. As we walk through this portion of the museum, and here in just a little bit we'll actually take a tour of the site, let's look a little bit about the artifacts that you're seeing. The vast majority of artifacts recovered at Poverty Point are small, baked-shaped items made of loess, found in a wide variety of forms, and they're referred to as Poverty Point objects, or sometimes the park rangers will call them PPOs. Except for unique specialized forms, archaeologists generally conclude the fired earthwork objects were used in cooking, based on the artifacts recovery, and supported by archaeology. When placed in earth ovens, the objects are shown to hold heat and aid in cooking. The inhabitants of Poverty Point produced small amounts of pottery, creating a variety of different types of fiber-tempered, grog-tempered, and untempered, with both the wheel and the Old Floyd design styles as decoration. Most commonly, however, they imported stone vessels from other people made of stellite from the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. Most of the Poverty Point tools appear to have been made on site, as there is evidence of debris from the manufacturing process found across the ridges. An analysis of these artifacts recovered from the ridges demonstrate that individual ridges and sectors of earthworks were used for specialized activity. One thing to keep in mind, there is no naturally occurring stone at Poverty Point. Based on the distant geological sources of different kinds of stone used to make artifacts recovered at Poverty Point, archaeologists have concluded that the inhabitants were active in trade with other Native Americans. For example, a large number of projectile points were made from raw materials that occurred in the Ouachita and Ozark Mountains and from Ohio and Tennessee and the river valleys there. As we exit the museum, we'll now start our tour of Poverty Point and explain what some of the earthworks look like. Enjoy the tour. Our first stop is station number 1, which is called the Plaza. From this station, or from this viewpoint, you can see the impressive size of the Poverty Point earthwork complex. The outer edge of the 43-acre plaza is defined by the taller grass that you see right here. The plaza was an ideal location for social events such as meetings, ceremonies, games, or trade activities. To create this flat central plaza, the site builders used basket loads of soil to fill gullies and raise low areas by as much as 3.5 feet. These circles, you can see off here in the distance, these circles of white cylinders ahead on your left and back across the highway over there where the visitor center are, represent 2 of the many features that were discovered using a magnetic gradometer to map what lies beneath the ground surface. About 40 circles and arcs that measured about 60 to 200 feet in diameter were found in the area of the plaza and innermost ridges. Soil cores and excavations revealed that the circles originally were composed of large wooden posts that stood about 2.5 feet in diameter, and they were erected by the Poverty Point people. The bottoms of the post holes are as much as 9 feet deep. The posts did not rot in place, but were instead removed and the holes refilled with soil. Several of the post circles were rebuilt numerous times. Radiocarbon samples from some of the posts indicate that they may be as old as 1630 BC and as young as 1100 BC. This suggests the post circles were part of a long tradition at Poverty Point, an important part of the landscape. But more research is necessary to determine why they were built and how they were used. This gives you an example of what we're seeing. Here's the road in front of us. And on each side, you can see the ridges. All this land was flattened and smoothed by the Poverty Point people. At stop number 2, we move out of the plaza area and start coming across the first of the C-shaped earthworks, which we see up ahead, which we're walking towards. The large and topographically subtle ridges vary in height along this World Heritage Site. Some are as small as just a few inches, and others can be as large as 6 feet tall. It's easy to understand why the ridge system really wasn't recognized until archaeologist James Ford examined these in aerial photographs of the site. If you take a look across this area, again, part of the ridges, part of the plaza area that we see here. The early American Indians undoubtedly built houses and conducted many activities along these ridges. Excavations indicate that they were used as living areas based on the presence of many cooking pits, hearths, post molds, which are soil stains left by rotted post, midden, dark soils with high organic content and accumulated debris, and an abundance of artifacts. The artifacts included large numbers of fired earth cooking balls known as Poverty Point objects, along with some projectile points and knives, and debris created while making those particular points and knives. Many stone vessels were found, fragments of those, blades, and other tools. Radiocarbon dating on some of these ridges and on some of the artifacts indicates that they were made and used sometime between 1530 BC and 1150 BC. At this stop, looking across here, we see one of the first of the mounds at Poverty Point World Heritage Site. This flat top mound is nearly 13 feet tall and about 300 by 360 feet at the base. There's a short extension or ramp on the northeast corner, which should be right about here, that appears to continue as a low ridge in the western plaza and perhaps all the way to additional mound that we're going to see in a bit later. Mound E was built as a series of 3 flat platforms. The topsoil was scraped from the original ground surface before constructing each of these platforms. Such a clean start was common practice for the mound builders of the lower Mississippi Valley. For many years, archaeologists were not certain whether this mound was a natural feature of the landscape or an artificial construction. Finally, in the 1990s, soil cores confirmed that this mound, Mound E, is an earthwork that was constructed by the early American Indians. Archaeologists also recently recovered a tiny piece of wood charcoal beneath the ramp of Mound E. A radiocarbon date indicates the mound was built sometime after 1500 BC. This is consistent with soil characteristics that indicate this mound was likely constructed in the early part of the Poverty Point culture occupation. Now, the purpose of this mound, again, about where that tall grass is, goes across over to here. The problem is it's really not known what these mounds were built for. Archaeologists have been in using various digging techniques as well as various types of radar and ground penetrating radar, and they have found no evidence for houses or other activities within the mound. The third feature that we find at Poverty Point is what's referred to as Mound A. This large mound that you see in front of us. In fact, it's the largest mound that you can find in the whole entire Poverty Point World Heritage Site. In the 1950s, archaeologist James Ford suggested that Mound A is shaped like a bird in flight. Actually, if you look at it from aerial views, it does look like a bird in flight. Ford envisioned the north-south extensions of the cones as wings and the eastward extending platform as the tail. Today, Mound A is sometimes referred to as the bird effigy mound. We don't know if the builders intended it to be a bird, but birds are often represented in the art of southeastern Indian tribes, including on many of the artifacts that we see at Poverty Point. Dated to roughly around 1350 BC, Mound A is the largest mound built by American Indians at Poverty Point, or at any earlier time in U.S. history. Mound A has remained the largest earthen construction in the U.S. for the next 2,000 years. Imagine that. When this was built in around 1350 BC, it was the largest earthen construction in the United States for over 2,000 years. Mound A today is about 72 feet tall. It measures 705 feet in length and 660 feet in width. This huge monument was built by piling basket loads of earth. It contains about 390,000 tons of earth, or if you look at it this way, it's about 15.5 million 50-pound basket loads of soil. Mound A was built in 3 distinct phases. The cone, or the tall ridge, that largest cone that you see here. The low, flat platform, that's hard to say, on the eastern side. It's a sort of a ramp that you see going up here. And then finally that ramp to connect the platform and the cone. Based on archaeological excavations and core samples, some archaeologists have suggested that Mound A was built quickly, perhaps only took about 90 days to build this mound. Now, if you take from the top, if you take a look down here, we'll go back over this way. And it's a little bit hard to see, and they're not sure why, but there are several mounds, quite a bit smaller, that go this way, and a few more, including the mound that we saw back over here earlier, that line up with the north-south line. Many people think this is just a coincidence, but also many believe that it was some kind of intentional acknowledgement, maybe a tip of the hat to the ancestors for the mound people. While it doesn't look like much and looks like a big hill, again, imagine this was a flat area in about 1350 BC. The Native Americans, those who lived in this area, built this mound by hand. This is not a natural feature. This is actually a constructed mound. It's a little hard to see from this vantage point, but if you notice, the ground surface on this field that we see right here, it dips down just a little bit to create a depression. Soil cores show that about 6 feet of soil was removed or borrowed from this area, which is why they call stop number 4 here the borrow area. The soil was probably used to build Mound A, that large mound that we saw just a few minutes ago. Or could have been used to build some of the other earthworks. But this was the field, again, was probably rolling ridges, tree covered. And this was the area that they used to take some of the dirt. And if we look back over here, just past the end of the road, we can see Mound A, that large 72-foot mound. Stop number 5 is what's called the Mound B field. For several thousand years prior to the construction of the Poverty Point earthworks, small groups of hunter-gatherers roamed in this area. A few spear point types that date to the time before the Poverty Point culture have been found in this large open area. Thus, Mound B field may have been used a lot longer than the other parts of the site. The Poverty Point aged artifacts found in this field are few in number and represent only part of the entire toolkit used by the ancient Americans. There are no dense middens to indicate extended habitation like those found in the Plaza ridge areas that we saw when we first started the tour. We do know that the Poverty Point people were active in this area based upon some of the archaeological information that we found that we've dug up from this field. But we're really just not quite sure what it is that they were doing. Stop 6 is referred to as Mound B. Mound B is the oldest earthwork at Poverty Point, built sometime around 1650 BC. Today it measures roughly 21 feet tall in height and has a diameter of about 180 feet. Mound B was originally conical in shape before it was altered by archaeological excavations in 1955. Like Mound E, the construction of Mound B began by removing the natural topsoil. Then layers of dark, yellowish brown, and gray silt loam were placed on the clean surface. Next, 3 flat-top platforms were built that reached a height of about 14 feet. The surfaces of these platforms contain fire pits and possible post holes, evidence of activities that took place around the mound. Archaeologists have recorded impressions and stains from woven baskets and possible skin containers used to transport the dirt that formed the mound. Its cone shape was formed by soil placed during the final capping event. Here at stops 7 and 8, we learn a little bit more about the culture of the Poverty Point people. The people of Poverty Point relied on a range of wild foods from the surrounding landscape: fish, deer, small mammals, nuts, fruits, and seeds, along with turtles, frogs, waterfowl, and aquatic plants such as lotus and cattail would have been an important source of food. Plants and animals also provided materials used for shelter, cooking, tool production, and warmth. Even today, we see sightings that they would have seen back then of deer, armadillos, snakes, raccoons, and squirrels. Today, we occasionally see a black bear, which they would have seen back then, and any number of birds in the area that they would have used for various food sources. So we cross over the road on this side, we take a look at what's called the northwest ridges. You'll notice these wave-like appearances of ridges and swales in this section of the earthwork. A little bit hard to see, but if you look at the taller grass, here's one right here in the front, in the lighter part, and you start seeing more ridges there. These ridges are roughly about 2 to 3 feet tall and have been here for well over 100 years of agriculture, modern agriculture activities taking place here. Laid end to end, the combined ridge segments at Poverty Point equal about 6.5, about 6 miles of living area. If a structure was placed every 50 feet, which is what they think happened, over 600 houses could have been spaced along the ridges. This would have provided room for a considerable population. But based upon the weather, it gets hot down here in the summertime, it probably wasn't occupied year-round. At this stop, we're taking a look at some of the north ridges. Get a little bit better idea. See if I can get down. You can kind of see the ridges with the grass here in the front, brown area. Then you see the taller grass with those ridges that are there. Excavations have shown that the Poverty Point people moved a huge amount of earth to build some of the ridges in this part of the site. There was a large, deep depression in the ground that had to be filled before the Poverty people could even begin to build the ridges. Archaeologists documented about 8 feet of basket load filled dirt beneath ridges 3 and 4 here. Then they added more than 6.6 feet of earth to build the ridges. Over the years, soil from atop the earthworks has obviously kind of washed down a little bit into the swales. So even here, where some of these earthworks are some of the better preserved ones that we see in the entire World Heritage Site, the ridge tops are lower and the swales are shallower than they used to be. So imagine they used to be flat, a ridge that used to be maybe a couple feet tall, flat, and another ridge. And again, 100% not known what all this was used for. But this was all done by people who had no animals, no wheelbarrows, just moved things by hand in baskets of dirt. Our final stop at Poverty Point World Heritage Site is what's referred to as Mound C. This raised area that you see is known as Mound C, which today is about 260 feet long and about 80 feet or so wide. Now, part of that width has been eroded into, back behind Mound C here is Bayou Ridge. It appears to be about 6 feet tall, but the mound's base is actually only about 2 feet lower than the current ground surface. The mound wasn't built in a hole, though. Instead, dirt was added to raise the level of the plaza next to the mound. Mound C may have originally been loaf-shaped, shaped like a loaf of bread, but the form has been altered by a historic era road that extended through the mound's length. Mound C is unusual in being the only mound located within the Poverty Point Plaza. Again, here is the plaza area. Way past that tree line over there is the first mound. And everything in this field, the trees were cleared. The dirt was laid and smoothed to create a plaza point, or a plaza place. Again, Mound C is unusual. It's the only mound within this plaza area. Excavations into the mound revealed up to 16 thin surfaces or floors of differently colored and textured soil sediments. Some of the surfaces contained artifacts and features such as hearse, pits, and post holes. Like Mound B, the final construction stage of Mound C was the placement of a thick cap of earth over the mound. Radiocarbon dates from Mound C are consistent with Poverty Point construction and use. As we wrap up this tour of Poverty Point World Heritage Site, let's keep in mind, numerous earthworks in Louisiana date back to the Middle Archaic period, about 2,000 years prior to Poverty Point. However, the Poverty Point complex stands out as the first truly monumental earthen construction north of Mexico. While we may see these as just mounds of dirt, and the large mounds that we saw earlier on the tour, they were actually constructed by ancient people. The Poverty Point site also represents the work of a large and organized community with a population that likely numbered from a few hundred to a few thousand people. Such a community is remarkable for a hunter-gatherer society. Poverty Point was abandoned around 1100 BC, possibly because of climate change that caused severe flooding in the lower Mississippi Valley, although we really don't know. Flooding could have disrupted the lifeways of the Poverty Point people who depended on the rivers for transportation and on the floodplain environment for much of their food. Following the abandonment of Poverty Point, earthen mounds were not built again in Louisiana until about 300 years later, and then it was on a much smaller scale. Major mound construction did not take place again in Louisiana until the time of the Marksville culture during the Middle Woodland period in the 2nd century AD, about 200 AD. However, sites comparable to Poverty Point in both size and complexity were not built again until the Mississippi period, about 2,000 years later. I hope you enjoyed this tour of Poverty Point World Heritage Site. Awesome place. Fantastic amount of history, and just imagine, put yourself back over, 3,500 years ago when all of this was cleared and all these mounds and ridges were built. Thanks for watching.